Imagine walking into a place you own, only to be turned away at the door. That's exactly what happened to Mr. Thomas, a successful entrepreneur who founded a thriving company from scratch. Dressed in a modest suit, he approached his office building one morning, ready for an important meeting. But before he could even step inside, the company's secretary, a woman with a no-nonsense attitude, stopped him in his tracks. "I'm sorry, sir," she said firmly, giving him a quick, dismissive glance. "This office is private. You can't enter without an appointment." Thomas, calm but puzzled, tried to explain, but her stance only grew more rigid. What she didn't realize was that the man she was shutting out wasn't just another visitor. He was her boss, the owner of the entire company. What happens next? You won't believe how this encounter unfolds. Stay tuned. Thomas stood there, his confident demeanor unshaken, but inside, he couldn't help feeling a mix of amusement and frustration. He had built this company with his own hands, starting from a small idea in his garage to what was now a thriving business. Every detail, from the logo on the door to the team inside, was a reflection of his vision. Yet here he was, treated like an outsider in his own creation. The secretary, now tapping her pen impatiently, gave him another look. "I'm serious, sir. We have strict policies, and I can't let just anyone waltz in." Thomas chose his words carefully, not wanting to escalate the situation. "I'm here for a meeting. Perhaps you could check the schedule." But she was already shaking her head. "No need. I know all the appointments today, and you're not on the list." The tension thickened as Thomas quietly observed her unwavering stance. Thomas stood silently for a moment, letting the secretary's words sink in. He could sense her impatience growing, but he was more intrigued by her certainty. It wasn't just about being denied entry. It was the way she dismissed him so completely, as if she had already decided who he was without knowing anything about him. Meanwhile, inside the office, a few employees glanced curiously toward the door, wondering who the visitor might be. One of them, James, a junior staff member, thought he recognized Thomas. He had seen his photo in a recent company newsletter, but wasn't entirely sure. Still, he hesitated to speak up, unsure of how the situation would play out. Back at the door, Thomas tried again. "Are you absolutely certain? Maybe you should check with someone higher up." The secretary crossed her arms, standing firm. "Sir, I know my job. Now, if you don't mind, please leave." Thomas smiled faintly, realizing this was far from over. Thomas took a step back, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. The secretary, still oblivious to his true identity, sighed heavily and turned her attention back to her desk. Thomas, however, wasn't going anywhere. He stood there quietly, his presence unwavering, as if waiting for something, or someone, to shift the tide. Inside the office, James decided to act. He discreetly approached his supervisor, a middle manager named Clara, and whispered, "I think the man at the door might be Mr. Thomas. You know, the owner." Clara looked at James, her brow furrowed. "Are you sure? Why would he be standing outside like that?" "I don't know," James admitted, "but I'm pretty sure it's him." Meanwhile, back at the front desk, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Thomas checked his watch, the faintest trace of a smile on his face, as if he was enjoying the unfolding drama. Finally, Clara walked toward the entrance, her curiosity and concern growing with each step. As she opened the door, her eyes met Thomas's, and her breath caught. "Mr. Thomas," she whispered, her voice trembling. Clara's voice barely escaped her lips, but it was enough to shift the room's energy. The secretary turned sharply, her expression faltering as she noticed Clara's wide-eyed reaction. "Mr. Thomas," she repeated, her tone laced with confusion and doubt. Thomas nodded politely but said nothing, his calm presence now feeling almost too composed. Clara immediately stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter, but Thomas remained at the threshold. "I appreciate it, Clara," he said evenly, "but I'd like to understand something first." The secretary, now visibly uneasy, looked from Thomas to Clara, trying to piece together what she had just missed. Wait, are you saying he's? Before she could finish, another voice broke through the tension. It was a senior board member, Mr. Harris, emerging from one of the offices. His face lit up when he saw Thomas. "Ah, Mr. Thomas, we've been waiting for you." The room froze as the realization hit, but Thomas, still calm, turned to the secretary. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps you can explain." Her face paled as everyone's eyes turned toward her, the weight of the situation crashing down. But before she could respond, Thomas's gaze shifted to something, or someone, behind her, his expression darkening. Something wasn't adding up. The room was silent as all eyes turned to Thomas. The secretary stammered, her confidence from earlier now completely gone. I didn't realize," she began, but her voice trailed off. Thomas raised a hand to stop her, his expression calm but firm. "It's not about realizing," he said, his voice steady. "It's about how quick we are to judge people based on nothing but appearances." His words hung in the air, making everyone shift uncomfortably. The secretary looked down, visibly embarrassed, while Clara and Mr. Harris exchanged uneasy glances. But before the tension could fully settle, Thomas turned to Mr. Harris, his tone sharp. "And while we're here, I'd like to know why I wasn't informed about the changes at the front desk." Mr. Harris froze. "Changes?" he echoed, clearly caught off guard. Thomas gestured toward the secretary. "I don't recall approving her hire. Care to explain?" A murmur rippled through the staff. Mr. Harris hesitated, his expression revealing more than he intended. Thomas's voice grew colder. "Transparency is a value I built this company on. If I can't trust my team to honor that, then perhaps it's time for changes at a higher level." The secretary looked horrified, but Thomas's focus was no longer on her. With one final glance, he walked toward his office, leaving everyone to grapple with the weight of his words. What started as a moment of misunderstanding revealed deeper cracks, and a lesson no one in the room would soon forget. As Thomas settled into his office, the weight of the morning's events lingered in the air. Word spread quickly among the staff, sparking quiet conversations about what had unfolded. The secretary, still visibly shaken, approached Clara and quietly apologized. "I didn't know who he was," she said, her voice trembling. "But I shouldn't have treated anyone that way." Clara gave her a small nod, her expression thoughtful. "It's not just about who he is," she replied. "It's about how we treat everyone who walks through that door." Meanwhile, Thomas reviewed his meeting notes, the incident already a teaching moment in his mind. He believed in leading by example, and today had shown him there was still work to be done within his team. By the end of the day, Thomas sent out a company-wide message reminding everyone of their core values: respect, integrity, and fairness. It wasn't just about business, it was about humanity.